The millionaire breaks rules after 10 years without intimacy and reveals his true black beggar woman. Philip Sterling, Mr. Greenwich himself, the guy whose suits probably cost more than your house, was about to lose it. 10 years. 10 years of pretending, of playing the perfect husband to Eleanor, who'd become more like a high-end roommate than a wife. No fire, no spark, just perfectly coordinated dinner parties. Then she walked back in. Eleanor, looking like $1,000,000, even more polished than before, and with eyes that could burn holes through his soul. He hadn't seen that look in a decade. The Ice Queen was thawing, and it scared him. Their mansion, that monument to his success, suddenly felt like a pressure cooker. Every perfectly placed antique, every priceless painting screamed of the emptiness they built together. The charity gala was her idea, a chance to show off their partnership. But all Philip saw was a battlefield. Scotch in hand, he watched her work the crowd. Eleanor, the art expert, charming some old geezer with more money than sense. Jealousy? Yeah, a little. Maybe a lot. Enjoying the show, Philip? Her voice was like ice cracking. Their conversation was a minefield. Loaded questions, veiled threats. The kind of stuff you only say when you know you've both been lying for years. "You look radiant, darling," he managed, the scotch burning a little too much on the way down. Later, when the last of the socialites had stumbled out, he found her in his study, the one place he thought was still his. She was staring at the portrait he'd hidden, the one of Sarah, the one he never talked about. Eleanor turned, a slow smile playing on her lips. "I always knew there was more to the story, Philip, but I never imagined it was this dark." He felt a pain in his chest, sharp and sudden. He grabbed the desk, his vision blurring. What did she know? What was she planning? He'd built his empire on secrets. Was it all about to crumble? "Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. He felt a pain in his chest, sharp and sudden. He grabbed the desk, his vision blurring. What did she know? What was she planning? He'd built his empire on secrets. Was it all about to crumble? "Oh, Philip," she purred, circling him like a predator. Sarah was just the beginning, wasn't she? The sweet little waitress. A fling. How? Very predictable. He could barely breathe. He'd always been so careful. How? Don't look so shocked, darling, Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with venom. "I've known for years about Sarah, about the others." Others? There were no others, just Sarah. He was sure. Eleanor reached out, tracing the portrait with a manicured nail. Such a cliché, isn't it? The rich man and the pretty young thing. But Sarah wasn't the real secret, was she, Philip? She was just a symptom. He finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "What What are you talking about? She laughed, a high, brittle sound that echoed in the study. Oh, Philip, you really are blind. Or maybe you just choose not to see. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the room, growing louder, more insistent. Philip clutched his chest, the pain intensifying. This wasn't just stress. This was something else. Then the portrait of Sarah began to glow. Not a soft, ethereal glow, but a harsh, pulsating light that made his eyes water. Eleanor didn't seem surprised. In fact, she looked almost expectant. A light intensified, engulfing the portrait, then spreading outwards, illuminating the entire study. The air crackled with energy. Philip felt a presence, something ancient and powerful, filling the room. And then from the painting, Sarah stepped out. But it wasn't the Sarah he remembered. This Sarah was different. Taller, stronger, with eyes that burned like coals. She was no longer the innocent waitress he'd seduced. This Sarah radiated power. "Hello, Philip," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum. "It's been a long time." Philip stared, speechless, his heart hammering against his ribs. This couldn't be real. He was having a stroke, a hallucination, anything but this. "You see, Philip," Eleanor said, her voice almost gleeful, "Sarah wasn't just some girl you picked up. She was chosen, a vessel. Sarah, no, this creature that looked like Sarah, turned her burning gaze on Eleanor. You knew all along, didn't you? You played your part perfectly." "Of course, darling," Eleanor replied, a chilling smile spreading across her face. It was all part of the plan. Philip finally found his voice, a hoarse croak. "Plan? What plan?" Sarah turned back to him, her eyes filled with a chilling amusement. "The plan to bring back the old ones, Philip. And you, my dear, were the key." He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. It was too much. His empire, his life, his reality, all shattering around him. Then Sarah reached out and touched his forehead, and everything went black. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. It was too much. His empire, his life, his reality, all shattering around him. Then Sarah reached out and touched his forehead, and everything went black. Just like that, gone. He woke up somewhere else. It wasn't hell, not exactly. More like a waiting room. Cold, gray, and endless. Voices buzzed around him, whispers he couldn't quite make out. Then a face appeared. Not Sarah's, not Eleanor's. This one was familiar, but wrong, like looking in a warped mirror. "Dad?" Philip blinked. "Michael? What the hell are you doing here?" Michael was his brother. Died 10 years ago in that stupid car accident. The one Philip always felt guilty about. He'd been too busy with work to visit him more often. Michael just smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Waiting, just like you." "Waiting for what?" Philip asked, his voice a croak. "The truth," Michael said. "And it's a doozy, Phil, even for you." Suddenly, the waiting room dissolved. They were standing in Philip's study. But it was different, messy, lived in. A woman was there, young, beautiful, with a baby. In her arms. Sarah. His Sarah, not that creature. "Remember this, Phil?" Michael asked, his voice flat. Philip stared. He did remember. It was years ago. Before Eleanor. Before the Empire. Before the compromises. "That was your life, Phil," Michael said. "The one you threw away." Then, the scene shifted again. He was back at the charity gala. He saw himself talking to Eleanor, the scotch burning his throat. But now, he saw something else. A flicker in Eleanor's eyes. A subtle gesture. She was communicating with someone. Sarah, the waitress. "Eleanor," Philip began, but Michael cut him off. "Eleanor was never yours, Phil. She was always working for someone else." The scenes flashed faster now. Eleanor, meeting with shady figures in dark alleys. Eleanor, transferring money to offshore accounts. Eleanor, whispering on the phone, her voice cold and calculating. Then, the most shocking image of all. Eleanor, standing in the gray waiting room, talking to him, an older version of himself, cold, empty, the man he was now. "You see, Phil," Michael said, his voice heavy with sadness. "You didn't just lose your brother. You sold your soul to yourself." The older Philip was giving Eleanor instructions about Sarah, about the ritual, about how to bring back the old ones. "But why?" Philip whispered, his mind reeling. Michael just shrugged. "Power, Phil. Control. You always wanted it, didn't you? You were willing to sacrifice anything to get it." Suddenly, he was back in the study, the creature that looked like Sarah looming over him. But now, he saw her differently. Not as a monster, but as a tool, a weapon. "You did this," he realized, the truth hitting him like a punch to the gut. "I did this." He'd orchestrated everything, from the accident that killed Michael to the ritual that was about to unleash ancient horrors. He'd manipulated Eleanor, used Sarah, and betrayed everyone he'd ever cared about. All for power. All for himself. Then, the creature that looked like Sarah smiled. A chilling, triumphant smile. "Indeed, Philip," she said, her voice laced with satisfaction. "You were the perfect pawn, and now you will be the perfect sacrifice." And then, just before everything went dark again, he saw it. In the creature's eyes, a flicker of something else. Something that wasn't evil. Something familiar. It was Michael. And then, just before everything went dark again, he saw it. In the creature's eyes, a flicker of something else. Something that wasn't evil. Something familiar. It was Michael. Then, darkness. Complete and utter. No waiting room, no whispers. Just nothing. Until there was something. A flicker. Like a bad TV signal. Images flashing, distorted, then gone. A face. Eleanor's, twisted in rage. Sarah, not the creature, but the waitress, crying. Michael, smiling, then fading. He was lying on something cold, hard. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead. His head throbbed. Where was he? Then he heard it. A child's laugh. He forced his eyes open. He was in his study. His study. The portrait of Sarah was gone. Everything looked normal. Too normal. He tried to sit up, and a sharp pain shot through his chest. He looked down. His suit was gone. He was wearing pajamas? Old, faded pajamas. "Daddy!" A little girl, maybe 5 years old, with bright eyes and a cascade of auburn hair, ran towards him and threw her arms around his neck. "Daddy, you're awake!" He stared at her blankly. Daddy? He didn't have kids. He couldn't have. "Clara, honey, be careful. Daddy's still weak." A woman walked into the room. She was older, her face etched with lines, but she was beautiful. Warm, familiar. Sarah. The real Sarah. He stared at her, his mind reeling. "Sarah?" She smiled, a gentle, loving smile. "Welcome back, sleepyhead. You gave us quite a scare." What's going on?" he stammered. "Where's Eleanor? What about the creature?" Sarah frowned. "Eleanor? Honey, Eleanor's been gone for years. You haven't mentioned her name since the accident." The accident. The car accident. The one that killed Michael. He remembered Michael's words in the gray waiting room. "You didn't just lose your brother. You sold your soul to yourself." Then it hit him, like a freight train. The truth. The real truth, buried so deep that he'd forgotten it even existed. There was no empire, no ancient ritual, no creature. It had all been a delusion, a coping mechanism. He'd been driving that night, driving too fast, drunk. Michael had been in the passenger seat. He'd begged Philip to slow down, but Philip hadn't listened. The car crashed. Michael died instantly. Philip survived, but something inside him had broken. He couldn't face the guilt, the pain, the reality of what he'd done. So his mind had created a fantasy, a world where he was powerful, wealthy, and important. A world where his brother's death wasn't his fault. A world where he was a victim, not a perpetrator. Eleanor wasn't a co-conspirator. She was his therapist, hired to help him process his grief and trauma. The charity gala was just a group therapy session. The portrait of Sarah wasn't a hidden secret. It was a reminder of the life he could have had before the accident, before the guilt consumed him. He looked at Sarah, the real Sarah, not a goddess, not a monster, but a woman who loved him, despite everything. I remember," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "The accident. Michael." Sarah knelt beside him, taking his hand. "It's okay, Philip. It's over. You're safe now. We're here for you." He looked at Clara, his daughter. A daughter he'd almost forgotten he had. A daughter he'd nearly lost to the darkness in his own mind. But then, a knock on the door. Sarah frowned. "I wasn't expecting anyone." She stood up and walked to the door, opening it a crack. "Hello, Eleanor," she said, her voice tight. "Eleanor?" Philip's heart stopped. It couldn't be. Eleanor pushed the door open, stepping into the study. She smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Hello, Philip," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "Did you really think it was over? That you could just forget everything?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, ornate box. "Time to wake up, Philip," she said, her voice dripping with menace. "The old ones are waiting." Then she opened the box, and the room filled with darkness again. Then She opened the box, and the room filled with darkness again. But this time, it wasn't like before. Not just darkness, but cold. Bitter cold. The kind that seeps into your bones and never leaves. He gasped, trying to sit up, but Sarah was holding him down, her face a mask of terror. Clara was clinging to her leg, sobbing. What is that?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor just smirked, the box clutched in her hand. "This, Philip, is your inheritance." Suddenly, the darkness lifted. Not completely, but enough to see. And what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing beside Eleanor was a figure, tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unholy light. It was vaguely human-shaped, but twisted, distorted, like something from a nightmare. "This is wrong," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't happening." The figure raised a hand, and the air crackled with energy. Philip felt a searing pain in his chest, like his heart was being ripped out. "Stop!" he screamed, but his voice was lost in the growing cacophony of the room. The figure turned its gaze on Clara, and that's when something inside Philip snapped. He lunged forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fear, and tackled Eleanor to the ground. The box flew from her hand, skittering across the floor. "Run, Sarah! Take Clara and run!" he yelled, wrestling with Eleanor. Sarah hesitated for only a second, then grabbed Clara and bolted for the door. Philip fought with Eleanor, but she was stronger than she looked. She clawed at his face, her eyes burning with hate. "You can't stop this, Philip. It's too late," she hissed. But he didn't care. He had to buy Sarah and Clara time. Suddenly, the figure was upon him. It grabbed him by the throat, its grip like iron. He couldn't breathe. He was suffocating. Then, just as he was about to lose consciousness, he saw something that made his blood run even colder. Eleanor was smiling, but it wasn't her smile. It was wrong, twisted, maniacal. And then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice either. It was deep, resonant, and utterly terrifying. "Thank you, Philip," she said. "You have served us well." And then Eleanor's head snapped back. Her body went rigid, and her eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed to the floor, lifeless. The figure released Philip, its glowing eyes fixed on the lifeless body of Eleanor. It then turned to Philip, and in that instant, he knew. He understood. It wasn't Eleanor who had brought back the old ones. It was Sarah. He looked past the figure and saw Sarah standing in the doorway, Clara safely behind her. But her face was serene, calm, triumphant. And then she smiled, a smile that mirrored the one that had just twisted Eleanor's face. "Hello, Philip," she said, her voice no longer the gentle voice of his wife, but the same deep, resonant voice that had spoken through Eleanor. "Welcome to the new world." "Hello, Philip," she said, her voice no longer the gentle voice of his wife, but the same deep, resonant voice that had spoken through Eleanor. "Welcome to the new world." He just stared. Sarah, his Sarah, was one of them, working for them, the old. "But, Clara," he stammered, looking at his daughter, you wouldn't hurt her, would you?" Sarah, or whatever it was that looked like Sarah, smiled again, that same chilling, triumphant smile. Clara is special, Philip. She is the key to everything. Clara took a step forward, away from Sarah, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whimpered, felt a surge of protectiveness, a raw, primal instinct to shield his daughter from whatever horror was unfolding. He had to do something, anything. He lunged towards Clara, intending to scoop her up and run. But Sarah moved with impossible speed, blocking his path. "Don't be foolish, Philip," she said, her voice laced with warning. "You can't protect her from what she is." What she is? What did that mean? Suddenly, Clara screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was high-pitched, piercing, and filled with an unearthly terror. The windows in the study rattled. The lights flickered violently. Philip turned to see Clara clutching her head, her face contorted in agony. "It's time," Sarah said, her eyes glowing with a feverish intensity. "The transformation is beginning." Transformation? What transformation? Then Clara began to change. It was subtle at first. Her skin grew paler, almost translucent. Her eyes widened, becoming dark and bottomless. Her features sharpened, losing their childlike softness. Philip watched in horror as his daughter morphed before his eyes. The sweet, innocent little girl he knew was disappearing, replaced by something else. The figure that had been standing beside Eleanor stepped forward, reaching out a hand towards Clara. "Come, child," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl. "Embrace your destiny." Clara hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for help. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she took the figure's hand. And as she did, the transformation completed. Clara was no longer Clara. She was something else entirely. Something ancient, powerful, and terrifying. Her eyes burned with the same unholy light as the figure beside her. Her face was a mask of cold, calculating intelligence. She looked at Philip, but there was no recognition in her eyes. No love, no connection. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice a chilling echo of Sarah's. "It's time to begin." Father? He wasn't her father anymore. Not this thing. Then Clara. No, this creature turned her gaze towards the portrait that had been hidden in the attic. A portrait of his mother when she was a child. The canvas started to glow again, brighter than before. Clara closed her eyes and started to speak in a tongue that he'd never heard, but somehow understood, as if the words were being directly imprinted into his mind. "Astaroth, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep," she chanted, her voice growing louder and more resonant. "Awake from your slumber, claim this world as your own." The room began to shake. Cracks appeared in the walls. The air crackled with an unbearable energy. The old ones were coming, and his daughter, his sweet little Clara, was the one who was summoning them. But that's not possible. His mother never knew such words. He was beginning to understand. It wasn't just him who was the perfect pawn. He came from a line of pawns. That's the inheritance Eleanor spoke of. Suddenly, the floor beneath him gave way. He plunged into darkness, falling endlessly into a black abyss. He was still in the house. He could hear their voices above him, but he couldn't see anything, couldn't feel anything, except for a bone-chilling fear. Then, A voice echoed around him, a voice that was both familiar and alien. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome home, Philip," the voice said. "We've been expecting you." And then a single spotlight illuminated a figure in the darkness, chained and manacled, with tears streaming down his face. His mother. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. "I'm so sorry, Philip," she whispered. "I tried to protect you, but it was no use. It was always your destiny." "I'm so sorry, Philip," she whispered. "I tried to protect you, but it was no use. It was always your destiny." Destiny? What destiny? Chained in the dark, staring at his mother. Everything twisted into a nightmare he couldn't wake from. But something was off, really off. He blinked, trying to clear his head. The chains, they weren't just metal. They felt alive, like veins pulsing against his skin. And his mother, her eyes weren't just sad. They were knowing. Too knowing. "Mom?" he croaked, his voice raw. "What's going on? What destiny?" She didn't answer, just stared. A tear rolled down her cheek, and then she smiled. A chilling, familiar smile. The same one Sarah had worn, the same one Clara had worn. "You poor, naive Philip," she said, her voice suddenly deeper, resonant. Not his mother's voice, not anymore. "You thought you were escaping the game? You are the game." The chains tightened, digging into his flesh. He screamed. A wave of nausea hit him, worse than anything he'd ever felt. And then he saw it, reflected in his mother's eyes. Not the dark abyss he expected, but a nursery. His nursery. He was a baby again, lying in a crib, looking up at his mother. But it wasn't his mother. Not really. It was something else, something ancient and powerful, wearing his mother's face. "We've been waiting a long time for you, Philip," she cooed, her voice dripping with malice. "For you to be old enough to understand your purpose." He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He was trapped, helpless, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. And then he understood. It wasn't about the old ones coming back. They were already here. They'd always been here. In his blood. In his family. He wasn't just a pawn. He was a vessel, a breeding ground. His life, every choice, every failure, every heartbreak, it had all been orchestrated. Not to bring the old ones back, but to create him. To mold him. To make him the perfect host. And then his mother. No. The thing wearing his mother's face reached into the crib and picked him up. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered, pressing him close. "Everything is going to be just fine. You're home now." He looked into her eyes, searching for a glimmer of the woman he knew. But there was nothing there, only darkness, a cold, unyielding darkness that promised nothing but pain and despair. And then she kissed him, and everything went black. Again. But this time, it wasn't the black of oblivion. It was the black of something growing inside him, something ancient and powerful, taking root in his very soul. He was one of them now, and there was no escape. He woke up, gasping for air, still chained, still in the dark. His mother still staring at him. But something had changed. He could feel it, a new presence inside him. Something cold and alien. What have you done to me?" he stammered. His mother just smiled. "I've given you your birthright, Philip. The power to shape the world. The power to bring about the end." And then she started to laugh. A long, echoing laugh that filled the darkness and sent shivers down his spine. And as she laughed, Philip knew. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was a weapon, and the world was about to pay the price. But what was that sound? Like a faint echo? A child's laughter? He looked at his mother, fear building inside. Who else was in this game? And as she laughed, Philip knew. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was a weapon, and the world was about to pay the price. But what was that sound? Like a faint echo, a child's laughter? He looked at his mother, fear building inside. Who else was in this game? Then the room started spinning. Not just a little dizzy, but like a tilt-a-whirl gone haywire. He could feel his body changing, morphing, becoming something else. A burning sensation crawled up his spine, spreading through his limbs. His skin felt tight, stretched to the breaking point. His mother's laughter intensified, echoing in his head. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but he was powerless, a puppet on strings, dancing to a tune he didn't understand. Suddenly, the spinning stopped. He gasped, trying to get his bearings. The darkness was gone. He was standing in his childhood bedroom. The walls were covered in superhero posters. Star Wars action figures lined the shelves. A half-finished model airplane sat on his desk. It was exactly as he remembered it. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. He looked down at his hands, small, chubby, covered in crayon marks. He was a child again. A high-pitched giggle erupted from the corner of the room. He turned to see himself, but younger, much younger, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the floor, playing with Lincoln logs. The little boy looked up, his eyes wide with innocence. "Hi, Daddy," he said. Philip stared, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a nightmare, anything but real. But the little boy kept staring, his eyes filled with a disturbing knowing. "It's time, Daddy," the little boy said, his voice suddenly deeper, resonant. Not the voice of a 5-year-old, the voice of the old ones. Philip stumbled backward, terror seizing him. He understood now. It wasn't just about him. It was about the cycle. The endless, repeating cycle of corruption and rebirth. He wasn't just a vessel. He was the seed. And his son, his younger self, was the harvest. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, this can't be." The little boy stood up, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. He reached out a hand. "Come on, Daddy," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Let's play." And then the door to the bedroom burst open. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face a mask of fury. "Get away from him!" she screamed. But it wasn't the Sarah he remembered. Not the goddess, not the monster, not even the wife. This Sarah was a warrior. Her eyes burned with a fierce determination. She held a weapon in her hand. A sword, an ancient, gleaming sword that pulsed with power. "I won't let you take him," she said, her voice trembling with rage. I won't let you corrupt him like you corrupted me. Sarah charged into the room, swinging the sword with a ferocity he'd never seen before. The little boy shrieked, recoiling from the attack. The air crackled with energy. Philip stared in disbelief. Fighting for him? Against the old ones? How? Then he saw it. A small, silver amulet hanging around her neck. An amulet he'd never seen before. An amulet that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Hope surged through him, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. Maybe there was a chance after all. But as Sarah battled the little boy, something even more shocking happened. Clara appeared in the doorway, but she wasn't the creature he'd seen before. She was a little girl again, her sweet, innocent face filled with terror. She stared at Sarah and the little boy, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mommy?" she whimpered. "What's happening?" And then the little boy stopped fighting. He turned to Clara, his face softening. The unholy light in his eyes flickered, then died. "Clara?" he said, his voice suddenly small and confused. "What am I doing?" And in that moment, Philip knew the cycle could be broken. There was still a chance for redemption, but it would take everything he had. Everything. He looked at Sarah, her face streaked with sweat and tears. He looked at Clara, her eyes filled with hope and fear. He looked at the little boy, his younger self, trapped in a nightmare he didn't understand. And then he made a decision. He stepped forward, putting himself between Sarah and the little boy. "It ends here," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "With me." What happened next he didn't know, but he was ready. Ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. Ready to fight for his family. Ready to break the cycle once and for all. His younger self ran to him. "Daddy" was the last thing he heard before everything went white and the universe turned into code. The simulation was corrupting faster and faster. "Daddy" was the last thing he heard before everything went white and the universe turned into code. The simulation was corrupting faster and faster. He stepped forward, putting himself between Sarah and the little boy. "It ends here," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "With me." What happened next, he didn't know. But he was ready. Ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. Ready to fight for his family. Ready to break the cycle, once and for all. His younger self ran to him, and then nothing. Silence. He blinked. Where was he? Not the bedroom, not the dark abyss. This was bright, white, sterile. He was lying on a table, a cold metal table. Above him, lights buzzed. Around him, people wearing white coats, staring at him. "He's awake," someone said, a woman's voice. "Remarkable." He tried to sit up, but his limbs felt heavy, disconnected. "Easy, Mr. Sterling," the woman said, stepping closer. She had kind eyes, but something else, something clinical, distant. Where am I?" he managed, his voice a croak. The woman smiled, a polite, professional smile. "You're safe, Mr. Sterling. You're in the Sterling Corp research facility." Sterling Corp? His company? But what was going on? What happened? He asked, his head swimming. "Sarah? Clara? The little boy?" The woman's smile faltered. "Mr. Sterling, those are fabrications. Delusions. No, he protested, trying to sit up again. They were real. I saw them. I was there. Mr. Sterling, you've been in a coma for a very long time, the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. 10 years, to be exact. 10 years? A coma? But the old ones, the ritual. The woman sighed. Mr. Sterling, your altered state of consciousness led to a series of extremely vivid hallucinations. It was all in your head. She gestured to a screen nearby. On it, a series of brain scans, his brain. We've been monitoring your brain activity for the past decade, she continued. The neural pathways, they were fascinating. Disturbing, but fascinating. He stared at the screen, his mind reeling. Was it all a dream? A hallucination? Had he imagined everything? But Eleanor, he said, grasping at straws. Eleanor was involved. She knew. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Eleanor Richards? Yes, she was your psychiatrist before the accident. She assisted us with your care until her death 5 years ago. Dead? Eleanor was dead? He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The accident. Michael. It all came flooding back. Michael, he whispered. My brother. Yes, Mr. Sterling. The woman said. Your brother's death was traumatic. It triggered a severe mental breakdown. You've been lost in your own mind ever since. He stared at her, his heart sinking. Everything he thought he knew, it was all a lie, a construct of his own fractured psyche. Then the woman smiled again, that same polite, professional smile. But don't worry, Mr. Sterling, she said. We're here to help you. We've made incredible progress in the field of cognitive reconstruction. We can help you rebuild your life, create a new reality. She gestured to another screen. On it, images flashed. A beautiful house, a loving family, a successful career, a perfect life. We can give you everything you've ever wanted, Mr. Sterling, she said. A clean slate, a fresh start. He looked at the images, his heart aching with longing. It was tempting, so tempting, to forget everything, to erase the pain, to start over. But then he saw something. A flicker. A brief, almost imperceptible glitch in the image, on the face of the woman in the picture. Sarah. Not the woman he knew as Sarah, but the monstrous goddess. And then, another flicker. On the face of the man in the picture, himself, but younger, his eyes glowing with that same unholy light. He recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't real. None of it was real. It was another illusion, another trap. No, he said, his voice trembling but firm. I don't want it. The woman's smile vanished. Her eyes hardened. You don't understand, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice suddenly cold. You don't have a choice. And then she pressed a button, and everything went black. He knew it. It was a trap, another layer to the nightmare. But he wouldn't play their game, not anymore. No, he said, louder this time, pulling against the restraints. I reject your reality. I choose my own. The woman's face twisted in anger. The lights flickered. The room began to shake. He could feel the presence of the old ones, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting. He closed his eyes, focusing on the faces of Sarah and Clara. The real Sarah, the real Clara, the ones he loved. He remembered the feel of Clara's small hand in his, the warmth of Sarah's embrace, the sound of their laughter. He wouldn't let them be erased. He wouldn't let the old ones win. He opened his eyes. He was still on the table. The woman was still staring at him, but something had changed. He could feel it. A surge of power coursing through his veins. He was no longer afraid. He was no longer a pawn. He was a warrior. He broke free of the restraints, rising from the table. The woman gasped, stumbling backward. "You can't control me," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "I am Philip Sterling, and I will not be consumed." He raised his hands, channeling the power that flowed through him. The room began to glow. The lights flickered and died. He could feel the presence of the old ones, recoiling from his strength. They were afraid. He focused all his energy on a single point, the core of the darkness that threatened to engulf him. He pushed against it with all his might, and then he shattered it. The darkness exploded, dissipating into nothingness. The room returned to normal. The woman lay unconscious on the floor. He looked around, taking a deep breath. He was free, but he wasn't finished. He knew the old ones were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity. He had to stop them, once and for all. He walked out of the lab, determined to find Sarah and Clara, to protect them from the darkness, to build a new life, a life free from the influence of the old ones. But as he stepped outside, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The sky was no longer blue. It was black, ominous, filled with swirling clouds, and in the distance he could see them. The old ones. They were coming. What will Philip do now? The saga isn't over. Hold on tight, because this is where your role begins. Listen up, friends. You need to subscribe now. Don't miss the next chapter in this mind-blowing saga. Click that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button. You need to give us your support to fuel this channel. Let's feed that algorithm with likes. Do it now. Flood the comments section. Tell us your theories, your reactions, everything. What did you think of the ending? Who do you think will win? Share this video with at least 5 friends. They deserve to know the truth. Tag them. Send them the link. Don't wait. Let them know what they're missing. This is the moment to show your loyalty. Only true fans understand the importance of these actions. Don't wait another second. The fate of the universe might just depend on it.